Louis Pasteur, the man who changed the world. Part 1. A humble beginning. Chapter 1. A birth in the Jura Mountains. Louis Pasteur was born on the 27th of December, 1822, in the small town of Dole, nestled within the Jura Mountains of France. The child of a tanner, Jean-Joseph Pasteur, Louis grew up in modest conditions. His father was a man of intégrité, a sergeant in Napoleon's army, and instilled in young Louis the values of honor, diligence, and patriotism. Though his town was quiet, the world outside buzzed with change. France was recovering from the Napoleonic Wars, and industrialization was sweeping through Europe. But in Dole, things moved slowly. Life was centered around family, trade, and faith. Louis was an average student in his early years, interested more in drawing than science. He enjoyed painting portraits of friends and family. No one would have guessed that this quiet, artistic boy would become one of the greatest scientists in history. Chapter 2. Education and Awakening. In 1831, Louis' family moved to the town of Arbois, where he entered secondary school. He showed interest in art, often capturing the likeness of his neighbors in charcoal sketches, but science was still a distant horizon. That changed when he enrolled at the Collège Royal de Besançon. Encouraged by supportive teachers and surrounded by books, Louis began to discover his love for chemistry and physics. He devoured the works of Lavoisier and Berzelius. His drawings gave way to diagrams, and his curiosity deepened. At age 18, he went to Paris to study at the prestigious École Normale Supérieure, though the transition wasn't easy. The city overwhelmed him, and he failed his entrance exams. Undeterred, he returned to Arbois to study harder. The following year, he succeeded. In Paris, under the mentorship of renowned chemists like Jean-Baptiste Dumas, Louis' talents blossomed. He obtained degrees in science and soon embarked on a teaching and research career. He would never look back. Chapter 3. The Scientist Emerges. In 1848, Pasteur was appointed professor of chemistry at the University of Strasbourg. There he met Marie Laurent, the daughter of the university's rector. The two fell deeply in love and married in 1849. Marie became more than just a wife. She was his lifelong partner and supporter. Their love letters revealed a deep emotional bond and a shared belief in duty and discovery. That same year, Pasteur began his groundbreaking work on optical isomers, the discovery that certain organic molecules could rotate plain polarized light in different directions. He was just 26 years old. This breakthrough in molecular chemistry would establish his scientific reputation, yet it was only the beginning. Chapter 4. A New Frontier, Fermentation. While serving at the University of Lille in the 1850s, Pasteur turned his attention to fermentation, a topic of economic interest in the wine-making region of France. Winemakers faced a problem. Their wine was spoiling unpredictably. Pasteur investigated the process under a microscope and discovered that fermentation was not merely a chemical reaction, it was a biological one, driven by living organisms, yeast and bacteria. His conclusion shocked the scientific world. Tiny, invisible life was responsible for these great transformations. Pasteur's insights launched a revolution. The germ theory of fermentation was born. Chapter 5. The End of Spontaneous Generation. One of the most persistent beliefs of the era was spontaneous generation, the idea that life could arise from non-living matter. Pasteur set out to disprove it. In a brilliant series of experiments using swan neck flasks, he showed that broth left open to air but protected from dust and microorganisms remained sterile. Only when exposed to contaminants did life appear. Life is the germ, and the germ is life, he declared. His findings were definitive. Spontaneous generation was a myth. This triumph earned Pasteur admiration, enemies, and an audience with Emperor Napoleon III himself. The emperor supported Pasteur's continued research, which now had national and economic importance. Chapter 6. Pasteurization, a practical invention. With his knowledge of fermentation and microorganisms, Pasteur tackled another public concern, the spoilage of milk and wine. He proposed a solution. Heat the liquids gently to kill harmful microbes without destroying the product. This process, called pasteurization, became a cornerstone of modern food safety. From Parisian cafes to American dairies, Pasteur's technique saved countless lives from foodborne illnesses. Part 2. Vaccines, Tragedy, and Triumph. Chapter 7. Tragedy Strikes the Family. Despite Louis Pasteur's rising fame, his personal life was marked by profound sorrow. He and Marie had 5 children, but tragically, 3 of them died in childhood, likely from diseases such as typhoid and typhus. The loss devastated them. These tragedies ignited a new fire within Pasteur. His grief became purpose. He resolved to dedicate his scientific pursuits to protecting life, especially that of children. "I am tormented by the deaths of my daughters," he confided to a friend. "I shall devote my work to preventing such suffering." This emotional drive would lead him down the path of one of humanity's greatest gifts, vaccines. Chapter 8. Animal Diseases and Early Experiments. In the 1870s, Pasteur turned his attention to animal diseases, starting with chicken cholera, a deadly affliction in poultry. While experimenting with cultures of the cholera bacteria, an accident occurred. An assistant left out a sample that had aged. When this weakened sample was later used to infect chickens, they did not fall ill. In fact, they became immune to fresh, deadly strains. Pasteur realized the implications. He had discovered a method to vaccinate animals using weakened pathogens. This finding was revolutionary. It laid the groundwork for modern immunology. Next came anthrax, a terrible disease that devastated sheep and cattle across Europe. Pasteur prepared an attenuated anthrax vaccine and organized a public trial in 1881 at the farm of Pouilly-le-Fort. The vaccinated animals survived, the unvaccinated died. The demonstration shocked and amazed farmers, scientists, and government officials. Pasteur had proven that immunity could be induced safely. Chapter 9. The Rabies Breakthrough. But Pasteur's most dramatic victory came with the fight against rabies, a terrifying disease that had no cure and a nearly 100% fatality rate once symptoms appeared. Rabies haunted communities. Carried by dogs, foxes, and wolves, it struck victims with hallucinations, convulsions, and death. Pasteur began working with Joseph Meister, a young boy mauled by a rabid dog in 1885. Though terrified of intervening in a human without a medical degree, Pasteur concluded that the boy would surely die without his help. With the help of doctors, he injected Joseph with a series of weakened rabies virus preparations. The boy survived. The news spread like wildfire. Joseph Meister did not die, Pasteur later wrote. "I was seized with a joy I cannot describe." This success marked the birth of therapeutic vaccination in human and Pasteur was hailed a hero worldwide. Chapter 10. The Pasteur Institute. Flush with international praise and financial support, Pasteur founded the Institut Pasteur in Paris in 1887. It became a beacon of global science. There, scientists gathered to study infectious diseases, microbiology, and immunology. It was the first institution of its kind. Pasteur, now in poor health from a series of strokes, handed daily duties to protégés, but remained a powerful figurehead. He mentored a generation of researchers who would go on to tackle diseases like tuberculosis, diphtheria, and plague. The Institute carried his values: rigor, curiosity, compassion. Chapter 11. The Final Years. By the 1890s, Pasteur's health had severely declined. He could no longer speak clearly and often sat silently in the gardens of his home in Garches. Still, he followed the progress of the Institute with pride. He died peacefully on the 28th of September, 1895, surrounded by his family. France mourned. A state funeral was held, and his body was interred in a crypt beneath the Pasteur Institute, adorned with mosaics of his achievements. Inscribed above his tomb, he brought science to the service of humanity. Chapter 12. The legacy lives on. Louis Pasteur's legacy endure. His germ theory is foundational in biology and medicine. Pasteurization remains a global standard. His work in vaccination paved the way for polio, measles, and COVID-19 vaccines. The Institut Pasteur continues to fight pandemics and save lives around the world. He showed that science, guided by ethics and compassion, could heal humanity. Part 3. The Science Behind the Man. Words 10,000 and 1:15,000. Chapter 13. The Revolution of Germ Theory. When Pasteur began his research, the prevailing belief in disease origin was the miasma theory that sickness arose from bad air or environmental decay. Pasteur turned that belief upside down. Through meticulous experiments, he demonstrated that microorganisms were the causanat, the result of contamination and disease. Pasteur's germ theory of disease fundamentally reshaped medicine. He proved that invisible microbes, bacteria, fungi, and viruses were the culprits behind sour wine and beer, infections in wounds, deadly diseases like cholera, tuberculosis, and septicemia. His theory empowered physicians and scientists to focus on prevention, sterilization, and cleanliness, ushering in the age of modern medicine. The role of the infinitely small in nature is infinitely great. Louis Pasteur. Chapter 14. Surgical Asepsis and Joseph Lister. Pasteur's research inspired the British surgeon Joseph Lister, who applied germ theory in the operating room. Lister began sterilizing surgical instruments and cleaning wounds with carbolic acid. As a result, post-operative infections dramatically declined and countless lives were saved. Lister credited Pasteur for his scientific foundation. The two corresponded, and Lister later said, "Pasteur opened my eyes and gave me the guiding light." Together, their work created the field of antiseptic surgery, which would evolve into today's sterile surgical standards. Chapter 15. Chemistry and Crystallography. Before conquering biology, Pasteur made lasting contributions to chemistry, especially in stereochemistry. While studying tartaric acid crystals in 1848, he noticed that certain samples rotated polarized light differently, even though their chemical composition was identical. He discovered that molecular asymmetry or chirality was responsible. Pasteur had uncovered the concept that would become fundamental in organic chemistry, pharmacology, molecular biology. This work was groundbreaking. It showed that molecules could be left-handed or right-handed, laying the foundation for modern biochemistry. Chapter 16. His methods, observation, patience, proof. Pasteur was not a man of shortcuts. His methodology relied on careful observation, meticulous experimentation, relentless repetition, absolute documentation. He often said, "In science, chance favors only the prepared mind." He demanded precision in every trial, every control group, every flask. Failure was not a stopping point, it was a clue to be deciphered. His scientific notebooks remain a testament to discipline and patience virtues that remain essential in science to this day. Chapter 17. Opposition and Vindication. Pasteur faced intense skepticism from many in the academic community. His ideas challenged entrenched beliefs and powerful egos. Critics called his theories absurd. Medical doctors doubted that invisible microbes could cause such devastation. Veterinarians questioned his anthrax vaccine trials. Pasteur met these attacks with demonstration, not debate. He invited critics to observe his experiments. He conducted public trials and invited journalists. Over time, his evidence silenced opposition. Awards, medals, and recognition followed, but he never lost sight of the mission. Science in Service of Humanity. Chapter 18. The Global Impact. Pasteur's discoveries had ripple effects around the globe. In agriculture, his vaccine saved millions of livestock from anthrax and cholera. In medicine, his germ theory inspired the discovery of pathogens like Salmonella, Pneumococcus, and Meningococcus. In food science, pasteurization made milk, wine, and beer safer, dramatically reducing child mortality. In public health, his ideas helped eliminate epidemics through sanitation and sterilization. Countries across Europe and the Americas began reforming hospitals, schools, and cities based on his principles. Pasteur was no longer just a French hero, became a world savior. Part 4. Pasteur's Influence Through the Ages. Words 15,000 and 120,000. Chapter 19. Inspiring the Birth of Microbiology. Though Pasteur wasn't trained as a biologist, his work gave birth to microbiology as a scientific discipline. His discoveries in fermentation, disease, and immunology opened an entirely new dimension of Science 1, concerned with organisms invisible to the naked eye, yet profoundly powerful in their impact on life. After his work, an entire generation of scientists emerged, dedicated to the study of microorganisms. Robert Koch, who identified tuberculosis and cholera bacteria, Elie Metchnikoff, who discovered phagocytosis and helped develop cellular immunology at the Pasteur Institute, Sergei Winogradsky, who pioneered microbial ecology. Pasteur's influence transformed not only medicine but also environmental science, agriculture, and biotechnology. Chapter 20. Military Medicine and National Pride. Pasteur's influence extended into national defense and wartime medicine. During the Franco-Prussian War and after, French leaders began investing in Pasteur's research, viewing it as essential to protecting the health of both soldiers and civilians. He advised the French military on how to prevent typhoid, gangrene, and wound infections. His understanding of sterilization and antiseptics shaped battlefield medical practices. In Pasteur, we found the guardian of the French spirit and body, said one military doctor during the 1880s. His name became a symbol of scientific patriotism, and French society rallied around his achievements with pride. Chapter 21. The Pasteur Institutes Across the World. The original Institut Pasteur in Paris became the nucleus of a global network of research centers. By the early 20th century, Pasteur Institutes had opened in Saigon, Vietnam, Algiers, Algeria, Tunis, Tunisia, Dakar, Senegal, Tehran, Iran, Moscow, Russia, and later, more than 30 countries worldwide. These institutes focused on local disease plague, malaria, yellow fever, Japanese encephalitis, while also promoting medical education, vaccine delivery, and epidemiological research. Pasteur's spirit of international humanitarian science lived on in each one. Chapter 22. From Smallpox to COVID-19, A Lasting Legacy. Pasteur's vision didn't end with his death. His discoveries laid the groundwork for smallpox eradication, completed in 1980. Polio vaccination, the discovery of antibiotics. Fleming's work on penicillin was inspired by germ theory. The development of mRNA vaccines for COVID-19. When the world faced the COVID-19 pandemic in the 21st century, it turned to vaccination, sanitation, and microbial science tools that originated in Pasteur's laboratory over 150 years earlier. Pasteur gave humanity the scientific armor to fight invisible enemies. Chapter 23. Cultural Tributes and Global Honors. Pasteur's fame transcended science. His name became synonymous with progress. He received honors such as membership in the Académie Française, the Grand Cross of the Legion of Honor, medals and honorary degrees from Britain, Russia, Italy, and the U.S. Streets, schools, and hospitals, named in his honor, his image appeared on French currency, stamps, and monuments. Even in death, he was a national icon. Chapter 24, The Tomb Beneath the Institute. Pasteur's final resting place lies beneath the Institut Pasteur in Paris, in a cryptex-like marble mausoleum reminiscent of a sacred temple. The walls depict scenes from his greatest victories: the swan neck flask experiment, the anthrax vaccine, Joseph Meister's survival from rabies, the opening of the Pasteur Institute. Each mosaic glimmers with gold and deep colors-fitting tributes to a man who turned science into salvation. Visitors from around the world descend the marble steps to pay homage to the man who reshaped human destiny. Chapter 25, A Spirit That Transcends Time. Pasteur's life offers more than discoveries. It offers a model of what science should be: courageous, compassionate, ethical, and tireless in the pursuit of truth. In a world still plagued by disease and misinformation, Pasteur reminds us that knowledge saves lives, that humility and precision make the strongest scientists, and that science, guided by humanity, is the greatest force for good. Part 5, Personal Letters, Passions, and the Human Behind the Genius. Words 20,001, 25,000. Chapter 26, The Letters of a Devoted Husband. Behind the brilliant mind of Louis Pasteur was a tender, deeply devoted man. His marriage to Marie Laurent was not just a partnership in life, but also in science. Their correspondence, preserved in archives and memoirs, reveals a man of sincerity and emotional depth. Pasteur often wrote letters to Marie while away at conferences or during expeditions to observe disease outbreaks. "My dearest Marie," he wrote in one letter, "your voice and your smile are the sun to my thoughts." Marie not only provided emotional support, but also helped with his laboratory records, proofreading, and scheduling. She was, in many ways, the invisible scaffolding of Pasteur's monumental achievements. Chapter 27, A Father's Heart, Scarred by Loss. Louis and Marie Pasteur had 5 children, but only 2 survived into adulthood. The deaths of his daughters, Jeanne, Camille, and Cécile, devastated Pasteur and reshaped his scientific mission. Each loss came suddenly, often from infectious diseases such as typhoid or tuberculosis, against which medicine was powerless at the time. Pasteur blamed the cruelty of microbe sand, vowed to fight them with every tool science could offer. "If I cannot protect my own, I will protect the world's children," he once whispered at a funeral. It was this heartbreak that pushed him relentlessly toward vaccine development. For Pasteur, science became a sacred Otha personal crusade against invisible enemies. Chapter 28, Faith and Science. Pasteur was a man of deep Catholic faith, though he never allowed religion to obstruct science. Rather, he believed the two could coexist. He saw the beauty of creation reflected in molecular structure, microbial complexity, and the order of nature. "The more I study nature, the more I stand amazed at the work of the Creator." He was often frustrated by the false dichotomy presented by skeptics that a man of science must reject belief. Pasteur saw no such conflict. For him, understanding the natural world was a way to glorify its designer. This balance of rational inquiry and spiritual humility made him unique in an era of ideological division. Chapter 29, The Artist That Could Have Been. Few people know that young Louis Pasteur had a talent for drawing and painting. His earliest notebooks were filled with charcoal sketches of classmates, family members, and country landscapes. Teachers praised his portraits, and some encouraged him to pursue art professionally, but his heart ultimately belonged to science. Still, throughout his life, Pasteur retained his aesthetic sense. His notebooks were immaculately arranged. His diagrams were precise and often beautiful. His flasks were labeled in elegant cursive. He once said, Science is not only logicit, is beauty, harmony, and wonder. The soul of an artist never left him it, simply found expression through the microscope. Chapter 30. Moments of Humor and Humanity. Despite his serious public image, Pasteur was known to be warm, humorous, and sometimes mischievous in private. Colleagues recalled how he once pranked a student by swapping wine samples during a fermentation study. In another instance, he jokingly wore goggles and gloves to exaggerate caution in front of skeptical observers. He enjoyed walks in the countryside, reading poetry aloud, and visiting art exhibits with Marie. He adored dogs and always kept one by his side, perhaps in memory of the rabies victims he saved. These glimpses reveal a man not consumed by ambition, but balanced by human warmth and joy. Chapter 31. A Teacher to the End. Pasteur was also a passionate educator. He believed that knowledge should not be hoarded, but passed down. At the Institut Pasteur, he spent hours mentoring young researchers, often grilling them on methodology, but praising effort and honesty. He encouraged bold thinking, but demanded evidence. Question everything, he would say, but test twice. Students from all over the world came to study under him. His lectures were legendary for their clarity and conviction. He often ended them with a call to moral responsibility. Science should never forget its sole compassion. Pasteur's legacy was not just in discovery, but in the minds he shaped. Part 6. The Scientific Challenges and Rivalries. Words 25,000 and 130,000. Chapter 32. The Battle over Spontaneous Generation. One of Pasteur's fiercest intellectual battles was against the long-standing belief in spontaneous generation, the idea that life could arise from non-living matter. For centuries, scholars believed maggots emerged spontaneously from rotting meat, or that microbes simply appeared in spoiled broth. Pasteur was determined to refute this. He designed the now famous swan neck flask experiment. The long, curved neck allowed air to enter, but prevented airborne particles from contaminating the broth. The result: no microbial growth occurred unless the flask was tilted or broken. This experiment demolished the argument for spontaneous generation. His opponent, Félix Archimède Pouchet, challenged Pasteur's conclusions publicly. In front of the French Academy of Sciences, the two clashed in heated scientific duels. Ultimately, Pasteur's methodology and results prevailed. His findings became a cornerstone of modern microbiology. There is no circumstance known in which it can be confirmed that microscopic beings came into the world without germs, Pasteur wrote confidently. Chapter 33. Tensions with Robert Koch. While Pasteur was revolutionizing science in France, in Germany, another brilliant mind, Robert Koch, was making breakthroughs in bacteriology. Koch discovered the bacteria responsible for anthrax, tuberculosis, and cholera. His techniques for isolating bacteria and using staining methods were innovative and precise. But instead of becoming allies, the two scientists developed a tense rivalry, fueled by national pride, differing methodologies, and clashing personalities. Pasteur relied on attenuation and immunology, while Koch was more focused on identification and visualization. They criticized each other's conclusions, and during a medical congress in Berlin, they reportedly refused to speak to one another. Yet the rivalry pushed both men forward. Their parallel achievements shaped the entire landscape of infectious disease science. Today, historians recognize them as complementary pioneers whose different approaches led to a common goal: understanding and combating disease. Chapter 34. Internal conflicts in the scientific community. Pasteur also faced opposition from within the French scientific establishment. Some peers resented his rapid rise and wide public acclaim. Critics questioned his anthrax vaccine methodology, his lack of medical credentials, and his unconventional path from chemistry to biology. In 1881, after his Pouilly-Lefort anthrax vaccine demonstration, a group of veterinarians accused him of scientific fraud. They claimed he had not disclosed the full procedure and questioned his data. Pasteur responded with calm fury. He published detailed results, opened his lab to inspection, and held live demonstrations. His transparency silenced many critics. "Science knows no nationality," he once remarked. "Its conquests are the property of humanity." Despite professional attacks, he refused to be drawn into personal feuds. His data spoke louder than disputes. Chapter 35. The Ethics of Experimentation. As Pasteur moved into human experimentation, particularly with the rabies vaccine, he was forced to confront ethical dilemmas. When Joseph Meister became the first human subject for the vaccine, Pasteur was not a licensed physician. His decision to treat the boy carried legal and moral risks. Pasteur sought approval from a panel of doctors and consulted religious and legal authorities before proceeding. He understood the weight of his actions. When Meister survived, he became a symbol of hope. But Pasteur remained cautious. He advocated for strict laboratory controls, animal testing before human trials, and record-keeping standards that became the backbone of clinical science. "Do not practice science without conscience," he warned his students. "It is the soul that makes science noble." Chapter 36. When Doubt Crept In. Despite his towering reputation, Pasteur was not immune to doubt. There were times when vaccine trials failed, especially with avian cholera and swine erysipelas. At one point, he halted trials for fear of accidental harm. He worried about the reproducibility of his attenuation techniques. Unlike Koch's bacteria, Pasteur's vaccine strains were often unstable, sensitive to temperature, air, and time. He knew that one failed trial could discredit years of work. In private letters, he confided his anxieties to Marie. But in public, he maintained resolve. His motto remained, "Let me tell you the secret that has led me to my goal. My strength lies solely in my tenacity." Part 7. The Pasteur Institute. A Scientific Legacy. Words 30,001, 35,000. Chapter 37. The Dream Becomes a Reality. In 1887, at the height of his fame and with generous donations from admirers and governments worldwide, Louis Pasteur founded the Institut Pasteur in Paris. His vision was revolutionary, a place where scientists could collaborate across disciplines, conduct rigorous research, and train future generations all under one roof. The mission of the Institute was clear: investigate the causes of infectious disease, develop vaccines and treatments, disseminate knowledge worldwide, serve humanity through science. Construction was swift. The grand building, with spacious laboratories, lecture halls, and animal testing facilities, opened its doors in 1888. Though weakened by strokes, Pasteur was personally involved in every detail, from architectural design to laboratory layout. The Institute was his final masterpiece. Chapter 38. A New Generation of Scientists. The Pasteur Institute quickly became a magnet for talent. Bright minds from France and abroad came to study, research, and teach. Among them were Émile Roux, Pasteur's trusted collaborator, who played a key role in developing the diphtheria antitoxin, Albert Calmette and Camille Guérin, who later created the BCG vaccine for tuberculosis, Elie Metchnikoff, who discovered phagocytosis, laying the foundation of cellular immunity. The Pasteur Institute fostered a culture of rigor, experimentation, and ethical responsibility. It was the birthplace of numerous breakthroughs that would impact global health. "You have built not a monument of stone," said a speaker at the inauguration, "but a citadel against death itself." Chapter 39. Pasteur's Final Lectures. Though physically frail, Pasteur gave several emotional addresses at the Institute. One of his final public appearances came in 1892, during a celebration of his 70th birthday. Delegations from around the world attended. There were speeches in English, Russian, German, and Japanese. Children cured by Pasteur's rabies treatment presented him with flowers. The room wept as he rose to speak. His voice was weak but resolute. "I have done what I could. If I have had some success, it is because I was always guided by love for truth and service to life." He ended with a call to young scientists: "Do not let yourselves be discouraged. The future belongs to science and to those who prepare for it with passion and dedication." Chapter 40. The Global Expansion. After Pasteur's death in 1895, the Institute not only survived, it thrived. Branches opened across the world, from Algiers to Saigon, Buenos Aires to Dakar, Yekaterinburg to Casablanca. Each one addressed regional diseases with local expertise. In the early 1900s, the Pasteur Institute helped combat plague outbreaks in Southeast Asia, yellow fever in Africa, typhoid in Europe, rabies and anthrax globally. By 1920, it had trained hundreds of doctors, developed dozens of vaccines, and established a worldwide scientific network. Pasteur's dream of science without borders had come true. Chapter 41. War, Resistance, and Scientific Courage. During both World Wars, the Pasteur Institute remained active, often at great risk. In World War I, it provided vaccines to soldiers and researched treatments for gas exposure and wound infections. Scientists worked under candlelight as bombs fell on Paris. During World War II, under Nazi occupation, many Pasteur scientists joined the French resistance. They hid Jewish colleagues, forged documents, and sabotaged German biological supply lines. The Institute became a symbol of defiance, a beacon of truth in a world gone mad. "We fight not only disease," said one doctor in 1943, "but the disease of hatred itself." Chapter 42. The Institute in the 21st Century. Today, the Pasteur Institute continues to lead global efforts in biomedical science. It played a major role in sequencing the HIV virus. It led the response to SARS and Zika outbreaks. It was central in COVID-19 vaccine research. It collaborates with WHO, UNICEF, and international ministries of health. With 32 international institutes on 5 continents, it remains one of the most respected medical research institutions in the world. Pasteur's founding principle is scientific rigor, public service, global solidarity remain its guiding light. Part 8. The Philosopher of the Microscope, words 35,000 and 140,000. Chapter 43. Pasteur's Philosophy of Science. Beyond test tubes and petri dishes, Louis Pasteur cultivated a profound philosophy of science grounded in duty, truth, and the betterment of humankind. To him, science was not merely a profession, but a moral obligation. He believed it was the responsibility of the scientist to act not only as a discoverer, but as a guardian of public welfare. "Science knows no country because knowledge belongs to humanity," Pasteur famously declared. He saw science as a bridge knot, a barrier between cultures, classes, and ideologies. Chapter 44. The Prepared Mind. Pasteur's famous quote, "Chance favors only the prepared mind," became a mantra for scientists worldwide. He believed that genius was not about spontaneous brilliance, but about persistent preparation. Success, in his eyes, came from careful observation, constant questioning, relentless experimentation, integrity in interpretation. He taught his students that doubt was a virtue, but so was the courage to accept proof when it appeared. "One must work," he said, "and work constantly then, when chance visits, you are ready." Chapter 45. On Education and Youth. Pasteur was deeply invested in education. He often lectured at public schools, gave talks to rural teachers, and even helped design science curricula for secondary schools. He believed science should be taught as a way of thinking, not merely as a body of facts. Curiosity, he insisted, must be preserved from childhood into adulthood. In a letter to a teacher in 1884, he wrote, "If we cultivate in children the taste for discovery, the courage to ask why, and the joy of solving problems, we create not only scientists, but good citizens." He saw youth as the true inheritors of civilization and science as their compass. Chapter 46. The Ethics of Curiosity. Pasteur was haunted by the question, should all that can be discovered be pursued? His rabies work had brought him dangerously close to the edge of medical experimentation. He wrestled with questions about consent, safety, and risk, questions that modern bioethics would formalize much later. In his laboratory, he insisted on informed decisions for test subjects or their guardians, full documentation of methods and outcomes, honesty with the public even when experiments failed. He called on scientists to use knowledge as a tool for healing, never as a weapon for power or profit. Science without conscience, he said, is the soul's ruin. Chapter 47. A Scientific Humanist. Pasteur blended the rational and the emotional in a way few scientists did. He was both engineer and poet, chemist and humanist. He wept when patients survived. He prayed before dangerous trials. He honored the dead and healed the living. This synthesis of intellect and empathy made his message timeless. He taught that the scientist must observe like a skeptic, work like a laborer, reflect like a philosopher, act like a servant of the people. To Pasteur, science was an act of love. Chapter 48. The Legacy of His Words. Pasteur's writings and speeches were preserved not only for their scientific value, but for their moral clarity. From commencement addresses to academy lectures, his voice echoed with conviction. On peace, science brings nations together through truth. On healing, when I approach a child's bedside, I feel a sacred responsibility. On history, posterity will one day learn how much the world owes to science. Today, his quotes line the walls of medical schools, research labs, and public health institutions. They remind us that truth is more than data, it is a compass. Part 9. The Final Days and the Immortal Flame. Words 40,000 and 145,000. Chapter 49. Declining Health. As Pasteur entered his late 60s, the toll of decades in the laboratory began to show. He had suffered his first stroke in 1868, leaving him partially paralyzed on the left side. Although he recovered enough to resume his work, the damage lingered. By the 1880s, a second stroke further weakened him. He walked with difficulty, required assistance in the lab, and often spoke with effort. Still, he insisted on visiting the Pasteur Institute almost daily. "My body may tire," he told Marie, "but my mind still dreams." Despite physical limitations, he remained intellectually sharp. He reviewed lab reports, mentored researchers, and participated in Vaccine Strategy Discussion 7 as his health declined. Chapter 50. Surrounded by Family and Colleagues. During his final years, Pasteur spent much of his time at Villeneuve-l'Etang, a serene estate near Paris. There, he was surrounded by loved ones Marie, his surviving children, and grandchildren. Scientists from the Institute often visited to brief him on new developments. His study was filled with books, microscopes, and letters from admirers. Even kings and presidents wrote to him. Parents named their children Louis or Louise in his honor. Some brought sick children just to be seen by Hymen if he could no longer offer treatment. Pasteur accepted these gestures with humility. He insisted that the work was more important than the man. "I am only the servant of a truth greater than myself," he once told a journalist. Chapter 51. The Final Sunset. On the 28th of September, 1895, Louis Pasteur passed away peacefully in his bed at the age of 72. His final words, according to Marie, were whispered through trembling lips. "I cannot give more, but I have given all." The news of his death spread across the globe. In Paris, the government declared a day of mourning. Bells rang throughout France. Newspapers from London to New York published front-page tributes. Thousands lined the streets during his funeral. His coffin was draped with the French flag and carried through the streets of Paris by students, scientists, and soldiers. His burial took place not in a public cemetery, but in a crypt beneath the Pasteur Institute, a fitting tribute to a man whose life was inseparable from his mission. Chapter 52. The Crypt of the Hero. Pasteur's tomb was designed in the style of a Byzantine chapel, with mosaics that told his life story in shimmering stone and glass. One panel depicted the swan neck flask and his fight against spontaneous generation. Another showed the rabies boy Joseph Meister kneeling beside him. Another honored his battle against anthrax and chicken cholera. A final panel portrayed the foundation of the Pasteur Institute. The Latin inscription over the tomb reads, "Blessed is he who devotes his life to great and noble deeds." Visitors continue to descend into the crypt today, scientists, schoolchildren, heads of state all, bearing witness to the quiet power of a man who lived in service of humanity. Chapter 53. Mourning and Memory. The days following Pasteur's death were filled with tributes. Writers, philosophers, and scientists reflected on his influence. Victor Hugo, who had admired Pasteur deeply, had passed years earlier, but his words resurfaced in the public imagination. Pasteur enlarges the frontiers of life. Colleges established scholarships in his name. Hospitals carried his legacy into practice. Public schools told children his story not just for science, but for character. Marie Pasteur, his faithful wife, lived quietly for another decade. She continued to attend institute ceremonies, preserve his letters, and protect his legacy. She once said of her husband, "He gave the world more than knowledge. He gave it hope." Chapter 54. Pasteur's influence on medicine and beyond. In the century that followed Pasteur's passing, his discoveries continued to blossom. Vaccines for polio, measles, tetanus, and HPV. A revolution in aseptic surgery, the founding of epidemiology and public health infrastructure, advances in food safety, especially through pasteurization, even NASA planetary protection protocols drew from Pasteur's contamination control principles. His methodology observe, hypothesize, test, repeat became the gold standard in scientific inquiry. Pasteur did not just treat disease, he transformed how humanity understood life itself. Chapter 55. A Life Etched in Light. In the late 20th century, UNESCO declared Pasteur's crypt and institute a World Heritage of Science. His name now graces 20-plus universities, hundreds of schools and hospitals, over 1,000 streets across the world, a crater on the moon. Yet Pasteur's true monument is not marble or metal. It is the millions of lives saved by vaccines, the mothers who sleep peacefully, the children who grow up healthy, the scientists he inspired. His flame lit, not in arrogance, but in service burns still. Part 10, The Enduring Lessons of Louis Pasteur, words 45,000 and 150,000. Chapter 56, A Moral Compass for Science. Louis Pasteur was more than a scientist, was a moral force. He reminded the world that science is not only a tool of discovery, but also a mirror of our values. His insistence on ethics, compassion, and human dignity turned sterile glassware and flame into instruments of hope and salvation. In an age where science is often questioned, Pasteur's legacy endures as a moral compass. He respected life at its smallest scale. He honored truth with relentless integrity. He served humanity, not ambition. The greatest error of the scientist, he once warned, is to forget that he is also a citizen of the world. Chapter 57. The Scientist in a Divided World. Pasteur lived during times of war, upheaval, and intellectual revolution. He witnessed political collapses, pandemics, and revolts, but he never wavered in his belief that science could unite what politics divided. He refused to let nationalism corrupt knowledge. Though he clashed with German rivals like Koch, he always acknowledged their contributions. Even amid the Franco-Prussian tensions, Pasteur praised German researchers for their precision and dedication. To him, science had no borders, only horizons. In a time of polarization and misinformation, his message is more relevant than ever. Chapter 58. Lessons for Future Generations. As technology accelerates and science ventures deeper into genetics, AI, and space, Pasteur's principles offer timeless guidance. Observe patiently. Truth reveals itself only to those who look carefully, test relentlessly. Proof must be earned, not assumed. Protect the vulnerable, especially children, the poor, and the sick. Never compromise ethics. Even when the stakes are high, honor those before you. Science is a legacy, not a competition. These are not just lessons in technique, but in character. Chapitre 59. Pasteur in modern culture. Pasteur's name appears far beyond textbooks. In films and documentaries honoring his life, in medical dramas referencing his techniques, in popular books and children's biographies, even in art installations and music compositions inspired by microscopic worlds. He is quoted in UN sessions, medical graduation ceremonies, and Nobel Prize speeches. His image, calm, stern, determined, remains one of the most recognizable in the history of science. Chapter 60. A Flame That Never Died. Louis Pasteur's legacy is not a single flame, it is a chain reaction. He lit the fire in Roux, Metchnikoff, and Calmette. They lit it in hundreds more, and those scientists through generations have lit it in us. Every vaccine administered, every infection cured, every child protected is a tribute to the man who stared into a drop of cloudy broth and saw a revolution. As long as humanity believes in truth, compassion, and reason, the light of Pasteur will never dim. Final reflection. Louis Pasteur was not born a genius. He was an ordinary child, a curious student, a determined worker ant, a man who transformed grief into mission and mission into immortality. He changed how we live, how we eat, how we heal, how we think. But most importantly, he proved one enduring truth. A single life, lived with purpose, can change the destiny of the world.